Okay, so this last section is just going to finish up the endocrine glands that we're going to talk about in this class. So here you see the kidneys as an endocrine gland. The kidneys have to do with the RAS system, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And this system comes into play when you have high blood pressure. So what it does is it's going to, when you have low blood pressure. So this is going to increase your blood pressure. So how does this do this? When you have low blood pressure, the kidneys can tell because there's not a lot of stuff moving through the kidneys. So urine production kind of slows because you don't have a lot of stuff moving into the kidneys. So the kidneys are going to sense this and they're going to release the enzyme renin, which combines with angiotensinogen from the liver in order to produce angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is then going to be converted to angiotensin 2 using this angiotensin converting enzyme ACE. Now, if you've ever heard of an ACE inhibitor, this is a medication, but ACE is the enzyme that's along this pathway. So we'll continue on this pathway and then we'll go back and talk about what this medication does. So angiotensin 1 gets converted to angiotensin 2, and then angiotensin 2 is going to stimulate the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. What aldosterone is going to do is it's going to increase sodium reabsorption, which increases water reabsorption. So that's going to increase your blood volume, which increases your blood pressure. And we talked a little bit about aldosterone previously, but here we've got the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Now, what an ACE inhibitor does is this is a medication that's prescribed to people with high blood pressure. Sorry about that. So what this will do is it actually blocks this pathway. This pathway, its main goal is to increase your blood pressure. So if we have an inhibitor that blocks this angiotensin converting enzyme, we block this step along this pathway. So ACE inhibitors, that's the medication for people with high blood pressure. It prevents angiotensin 1 from being converted to angiotensin 2 and kind of stops this pathway, and that aids in decreasing our blood pressure. But as a system, a normal body system or endocrine system function, we have this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and its job is to increase your blood pressure. Insulin. So the pancreas produces many hormones. We're just going to focus on insulin and glucagon. The major function of insulin is to decrease your blood glucose. And it does this in a variety of different ways. First of all, it's going to tell your intestines to stop sucking up glucose from the diet. So you're going to start passing the glucose out in your feces. Then it tells your adipose tissue or your fat tissue to increase glucose uptake and to turn it into fat. So take the glucose out of your blood, put it in your fat cells, and store it as fat in your fat cells. Then insulin is going to tell the liver to take up glucose and take that glucose and turn it into glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of glucose, so it's literally chains of glucose molecules. And this is how our liver and our muscle cells store glucose. So it tells the liver, hey, store glucose. So turn it into glycogen. And then it tells the liver, turn it into fat too. So that it's not floating in the bloodstream, it's stored as something inside of the liver. Insulin is also going to tell your muscles to increase glucose uptake and increase glycogen synthesis. So just like it tells the liver to make more glycogen, it's going to tell the muscles to make more glycogen, packing all of those freely floating glucose molecules from the blood into a molecule of glycogen. And then it's going to increase protein synthesis. So insulin has a lot of different functions. In the case of diabetes mellitus, there's type 1, which is usually an autoimmune disease, and then there's type 2, which is more associated with obesity and lifestyle choices. So in type 1 diabetic, they do not produce insulin, or they're not producing the correct form of insulin. There's something wrong with their insulin production. Type 1 diabetics benefit from taking insulin. So in order to correct type 1 diabetics, they take insulin. So way back when, there was a bunch of kids that were dying, and they had all these dying kids in this ward. And doctors decided to try some random last-minute treatment for these poor dying children. And they took this pig extract and they gave it to the kids. And miraculously, they all started to get better. And it was hailed this miracle. So then they worked like crazy to try to isolate the actual molecule that fixed these children and prevented them from dying. And when they isolated it, they found out that it was insulin. Now it takes about 8 pigs, the pancreas of 8 pigs, in order to produce 1 dose of insulin. And that's just not efficient. So nowadays we use bacteria to make insulin through the process called bacterial transformation. And I'll talk all about that if you take me for micro, but it's just kind of an interesting thing about where insulin came from. Type 2 diabetic, they're producing insulin just fine. It's just the insulin receptors are failing, or the cells are not responding properly to insulin. Sometimes type 2 diabetics are still treated with insulin, although a majority of the times it's more like lifestyle changes. The pancreas also produces glucagon, and what glucagon's job is opposite of insulin. It's supposed to increase blood glucose. So it's going to tell your muscles and your liver and your fat cells to break down glycogen in order to release glucose into the blood, or to convert fat into glucose in order to release glucose into the blood. So it increases that gluconeogenesis, or production of glucose, and it's going to tell your liver to break down glycogen so that you can release more glucose into the blood. And now we get to the gonads. So for the testes produce testosterone, and this is the major male sex hormone. So it's going to regulate all of the major male sex characteristics. But it also does a lot of other things. So for the skin, it's responsible for inducing the growth of facial hair and body hair, and it supports collagen production. For the brain, this is responsible for sex drive, positive feelings. It aids in cognition and memory. In the bone marrow, it increases red blood cell production. Red blood cells are responsible for transporting oxygen, and oxygen is needed for energy production. And since males have more dense muscle mass than women do, they need a lot of energy produced, so they need a lot of oxygen, so they're going to have a higher amount of red blood cells, kind of referred to as the hematocrit. Bone, they have increased bone density. If you think of the evolutionary purpose of a man is to challenge other males and fight for a mate, so if they have strong bones, they're able to do that. Increase muscle mass and strength. Again, the evolutionary purpose of a man is to fight for a mate, so having stronger muscle mass will allow them to have a sexual advantage. For their sex organs, it induces sperm production, prostate growth, and erectile function. The role of estrogen and progesterone from the ovaries in women. So estrogen builds up the uterine lining. It increases body fat, causes depression, headaches, migraines. It interferes with thyroid hormone. It increases blood clotting, decreases libido, impairs blood sugar control. It increases the risk of endometrial cancer, and increases the risk of breast cancer. So estrogen is actually pretty dangerous, and this is why, especially with the blood clotting thing, they tell women not to stay on birth control for too long. This is why migraines with women can come in cycles. So if you're a woman that gets migraines, usually it's right around the time that you have your menstrual cycle, when estrogen is kind of in full swing and producing, a lot of estrogen is being produced. So progesterone does some kind of opposite functions. So it maintains the uterine lining for pregnancy. It helps us use fat for energy. It serves as an antidepressant. It facilitates thyroid hormone action to increase our metabolism. It normalizes blood clotting, restores libido, regulates blood sugar levels, protects us from endometrial cancer, and probably prevents breast cancer. So having this produced during pregnancy is important because we want to be happy during pregnancy. We want to use fat for energy so that we can feed our developing baby. It facilitates metabolism, so again, that we can have these metabolic products for our developing baby, regulates blood sugar levels, and so forth. So that's all good stuff that's going to promote the pregnancy. Now, just because we have ovaries and testes listed here doesn't mean that men don't produce estrogen and women don't produce testosterone, because they definitely do. Men produce estrogen, and if they produce too much estrogen, usually the men will appear to be really nice and calm and usually a little bit more on the chunky side than a man that has excess testosterone production. And women, that testosterone that they produce kind of becomes more evident at menopause. So what menopause is, it's when we stop producing estrogen. When a woman stops producing estrogen, estrogen is kind of the predominant hormone that's produced in high quantities in a woman, and estrogen can mask the effects of testosterone. But as soon as estrogen goes away, testosterone production kind of comes through. And that's when postmenopausal women, you sometimes see that they start growing facial hair and their voice deepens a little bit. But other than that, menopause in general comes with a whole slew of issues. So decreased estrogen production, low testosterone levels are starting to be produced. Erratic levels of estrogen and progesterone can occur. Low levels of estrogen and thinner vaginal walls, which leads to vaginal dryness and pain during sex. So common symptoms include hot flashes, night sweats, decreased libido, irregular periods, mood swings. Eventually, women stop having periods altogether, and then they're no longer able to successfully have children.